I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. Tonight we're leading off with a story about vision for the future. We've been talking to the candidates who are running for mayor in Portland, and tonight we'll hear from Rene Gonzalez, his vision for the future. It's our big story tonight. Rene Gonzalez is a lawyer and a business owner and a current city council member in Portland. He got into politics during COVID, pushing to open schools again and get kids back into the classroom. The biggest issue for whoever becomes Portland's next mayor is the homeless issue. Blair Best is talking with each candidate to get their vision on how they'll deal with the problem if elected. Here's her conversation now with Rene Gonzalez.
Better than it was 2 years ago. Not nearly as clean or as safe as we'd like it.
Portland City Commissioner and mayoral candidate Rene Gonzalez sees Portland as a work in progress, especially when it comes to homelessness.
We've spent about $13 million as a city cleaning up homeless camps in the city of Portland. Sometimes it feels like whack-a-mole, but it is creating some positive environments in certain parts of the city. Secondly, we banned outdoor drug use in the city of Portland. I led that charge, and the state has recently taken that up at the state legislative level and now essentially reversed Measure 110. Overall, that's sending a message that we don't want this drug use in our city. We still see way too much of it on our streets, but every time we take a stand, it's positively impacting the environment.
So if elected, will people still be sleeping on the sidewalks?
You know, I think for the last 20 years, we've had folks running for mayor promise to end homelessness. I think in every election cycle, we'll hear someone promise to end unsheltered camping. I'm not going to promise that that's going to disappear. It has been with us for as long as the city of Portland has existed, and but it used to be much better than it is today. I will commit to return Portland to one of the cleanest, safest cities in America, and that means taking sometimes hard positions on unsanctioned camping, but never abandoning compassion.
Will you support camp removals without adequate shelter?
Yes.
Why?
One, I don't think it's either or. We're going to continue to invest in shelter.
Many people argue that your response to homelessness is too harsh. One example is calling for Portland Street Response to stop handing out tents. How do you plan, without adequate shelter, to make change in this crisis in a humane way?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing is some really debilitating drug use and self-destructive behavior in certain segments of our unsheltered population. We cannot continue to feed that beast. It wasn't just tents and tarps. They stopped the distribution of drug kits.
So if elected, you'll continue to call for no more handing out tents and tarps?
Absolutely not, except for potentially in sanctioned camping sites. The broad handing out of tents and tarps by the city and county, absolutely not.
So the city can only do so much when it comes to, say, handing out tents and tarps or not doing so. How will you approach the relationship with the county? What will you do differently to fix what has been somewhat of a rocky relationship thus far?
I mean, I will say there have been shifts at the county level. They're emphasizing to a much greater extent shelter than they were a year ago. You know, it was all about housing first in the Joint Office on Homelessness. You've seen some shifts even in how they define housing first now and their willingness to support shelter. I think that's because the city increasingly had a stern voice on that, and we didn't back down. We didn't get guilted into wanting to alleviate on the street while we're all fighting for long-term housing for folks. So I think, you know, I'm proud of what I've contributed to the shift in tone from the city. The bottom line, we send $35+ million to the Joint Office on Homeless every year. I will not support continuing to send dollars there unless we see real improvements in shelter being brought online, unless we see support for Portland Street Response and for some of our other houseless outreach that the city has to pay for directly. Though we should be getting financial support from that from the Joint Office on Homelessness.
So you think the county's been enabling some of this crisis?
Yes, and I think a lot of well-intentioned nonprofits have as well.
I mean, they oversee some 200 nonprofits. How will you be the one to change the way they hold those nonprofits accountable?
We're already seeing progress in the proposed new IGA in terms of, first of all, just talking about metrics. What are your actual outcomes, and are you actually going to report on how many people you're getting into shelter, or how many people in a shelter are getting into supportive housing? We have seen positive shifts in the county in the last year based on the demands from the city and frankly from the public as a whole. So I think we continue down that path, but they're not going to have our money from the city if they're not going to support the programs we're doing in direct outreach.
So let's talk about some of those programs that they help you out with, like the task sites or the Safe for Us villages. Will you continue to support those programs if elected?
Yes, I think they've shown some real progress.
If you're calling for the city to stop funding the joint office, how do you expect the county to then continue funding the city's sheltering programs?
We would stop funding if they are engaging in enabling behaviors and don't send dollars back on our city programs. Having said that, they're well supported by Metro in the supportive housing bonds, and they are struggling to get those dollars out the door. So I'm not sure they really need the city money, frankly. This is no longer a place where nonprofits and governmental entities are giving people a means to really engage in damaging behavior.
So the people who choose to live outside and say no to shelter, do you see that as a city responsibility to deal with them or a county responsibility?
I think we are law enforcement. We are first responders. So when it comes to having someone in front of your house that you don't want there anymore, there's only one government that's going to respond. That's the city. And frankly, we'd like there to be outreach workers who can get that person to move. But if they refuse to move, it's the police department that's going to be responsible ultimately for that piece. But long term, for people to rebuild their lives, that's largely a county and state responsibility in terms of behavioral health. It's very, very important the next mayor is committed to restoring the commons and isn't afraid to say that.
Blair's with me now. Super interesting story. What's this commons thing he's talking about?
It's really funny you bring that up because I actually thought the same thing. I think what he's referring to is like common areas downtown Portland. It's just his way of saying that, I guess.
All right. And then the millions that he's talking about, possibly if he's mayor, withholding from the joint office. I'm a little confused on that because it seems like if he gives that money to the joint office, he wants to make sure the joint office reinvests that back in the city shelters. Mm-hmm. And if he doesn't give it to the joint office, he's probably going to have to reinvest it in the city shelters himself. So what is the deal?
Right. I also want to point out this is not the first time we've heard this argument asking the city to stop funding the Joint Office of Homeless Services. And for people who don't know, that's the county and city-led program that manages all the funding meant for homelessness in Portland. So yes, to your point, if the city withholds that funding, sure, maybe it'll go into the city sheltering programs. But I would argue it's not enough. They need long-term funding. I mean, for example, what we're seeing at the temporary alternative shelter site in Southeast Portland, they have a bunch of people in there, a bunch of people ready for housing, but the city is currently asking the county for more money for rental assistance for those people ready for their own apartment, but they need long-term funding solutions for these projects to work.
Wow, it is such an expensive problem.
It really is, yeah.
Okay, so you've been on the streets for 2 years doing homeless stories, and you've interviewed a lot of the leading politicians now running for mayor. What did you think about Gonzalez? Are his plans, are his ideas realistic?
I think they are, and I only say that because of what I've seen. Like you said, 2 years, 5 days a week pretty much. I talk with homeless people, I talk with people addicted to drugs, and I hear their stories, and I can tell you it's not a black and white blanket solution. And so, you know, hearing from other people running for mayor and hearing we're going to end homelessness in a year or cut it in half in a year's time, ambitious, yes. Realistic, I'm not quite sure. So
You're not going to bet again.
I feel
not going to bet on that.
Right. I feel like Gonzalez is realistic in what can and cannot be done, even though some people, I will say, you know, believe his policies are too harsh and lack compassion, and I can also see that as well.
Yeah, I noticed he did sort of dodge that one question about how are you going to compassionately do this?
Yeah, and I made sure to ask him that because I was curious, and I'm not sure I got a straight answer.
Yeah, well, I'm sure he feels as compassionate, but yeah, you're right, he didn't answer the question. All right, thank you, Blair. Great stuff as always. So now it's your turn. What do you think about what Commissioner Gonzalez had to say? Anything surprise you? Let us know, will you? Send us an email. The address is thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. And be sure to tune in next week for Blair's sit-down interview with another current city commissioner running for mayor. This one, Carmen Rubio. Again, that's next week on The Story. The election, by the way, is going to be held in November. Now, let's give you an update on Portland's 90-day fentanyl emergency and what's being done. There's a new way to track the human toll of the fentanyl crisis in the Rose City. This week, the Multnomah County Health Department released a dashboard to track fatal and non-fatal overdoses involving fentanyl. And here's the depressing news so far. 785 people died from suspected or confirmed overdoses last year. That's 2 people a day every day for an entire year. So far this year, 186 people have died from an overdose, 68 of those fentanyl. That's lower than this same time last year when 138 people had died from a fentanyl overdose. However, the county experts say, hold on, this year's death toll is probably higher because there's a delay in the tracking of some of the information. Now, here's some homeless people we talked with this week, deep in their fentanyl addiction.
I would think it'd be more, just from the basis of what I've seen, because it's high quality dope. This is about 20 hits probably.
And how long will that last you?
This will last me personally probably like throughout the morning.
I mean, like our epidemic here in Portland's gotten pretty out of control, and I think that, you know, like how when we go swimming in the summertime, there's like lifeguards out there to like help people from drowning. Why don't we have like somebody out there trained to do Narcan like on the streets?
Well, actually, we do have first responders doing just that. It's just there's not enough of them. The Fire Bureau has a team of 2 people dedicated to overdose response. Data shows the Portland Fire has responded to 674 non-fatal overdoses so far this year, more than the 3rd month of the year, folks. It also shows 392 people have gone to the hospital because of opioids.
It's because I'm not proud of it. I don't want to do this anymore. Especially being homeless, it keeps you stuck. Like who wants to like, you know, try hard and not feel numb when like they're waking up in a tent, you know, in the cold and stuff. So and like struggling to figure out how you're gonna eat every day. You waking up to a nightmare, you know. Like the nightmare is supposed to be in the night, not like when you wake up every day.
As Blair continues to show us that despair, unfortunately, is not hard to find on Portland streets. Now, this fentanyl dashboard is just that, an online tool to track the number of fentanyl-related overdoses. As far as concrete action that's been spurred by the 90-day fentanyl emergency that appears to have been limited to police patrolling fentanyl hotspots in certain southwest blocks of downtown Portland and targeting dealers. The emergency also allowed for the pausing of bottle deposits at 2 locations downtown, something people on the streets say won't stop them from getting their drugs.
It was just shocking to me that they tried to say that was the butt of like the money, like for the people that use. Sorry, I spit it on you. It's okay. For people that use fentanyl, because I know that I don't turn pop cans in, and I know that people that the real access to the money is not from pop cans. It's like less than 1%. But
So you don't use cans to get money. So
no.
What do you do?
Me, I personally I work. I have a job, and but primarily I think the majority of the people, you know, boost clothes. They steal to eat.
All kinds of folks out there. That man told us he works as a bartender and told Blair that he could afford an apartment if he wanted to, but he stays in a tent and spends about $60 a day on drugs. He also told her he's thinking about trying to get clean soon. People we've heard from on the street say they're looking for more detox and treatment services. There are not enough in Portland. But of course, treatment also hinges on people being ready to quit, which, as you saw in this very segment, varies widely, person to person. Coming up next on the story, Oregon's habitat conservation plan that will limit some logging to protect endangered species. Well, it's attracted all kinds of opposition over the years, but now an unlikely plaintiff is suing the Department of Forestry over the plan's impact on timber tax revenue. Environmental reporter Cale Williams explains when the story returns. Now to an update on a story we brought you last night about styrofoam recycling in the Portland area. Environmental reporter Cale Williams told us how the Agilix facility in Tigard stopped taking styrofoam last week and that it was the only option left for those of us in the metro area. Well, several of you disagreed. You wrote to us last night with messages like this. Mike and Trevor said, "Hey, whoa, we were surprised to see you did not mention Ridwell as an option to dispose of styrofoam. We just sent off a large bag yesterday. Now we are curious to find out how they are disposing of it since we pay per bag." And Ketty was a bit more forceful. "Your report is wrong. Ridwell, the fabulous recycling company, absolutely takes styrofoam." All right, well, that got our attention. So we started down the path to see how Ridwell handles the material in the metro area, and we made an interesting discovery. Turns out Ridwell was sending your styrofoam to, wait for it, Agilix. So we got in touch with Ridwell today to see where they're going now. They told us, "We are researching alternative partners and hope to have a new local option soon. In the meantime, we're transporting all polystyrene," that's what they call styrofoam, "picked up in the Portland area to another PNW partner, Styro Recycle in Kent-Wa. Ridwell members will experience no lapse in polystyrene pickup service." So yes, Ridwell will still take your styrofoam, but some of the environmental benefit sort of lost because now it needs to be driven all the way up to King County, Washington, instead of being dropped off in Tigard. Thanks to those of you who brought this issue to our attention. Let's stay on the environmental beat for a moment to talk about timber. The Oregon Department of Forestry worked on something called a habitat conservation plan for years and recently sent it to the feds for final approval. It conserves by stopping logging in some forests, and that has stirred up a lot of controversy along the way. And now there is a lawsuit, not from a timber company or an environmental group, but from a small school district in Clatsop County that's home to less than 150 students. Cale Williams has our story.
For years, environmental advocates and timber interests have been fighting over something called a habitat conservation plan. The plan would set aside parts of state forests in Tillamook and Clatsop counties, prohibiting logging to protect endangered species. But that would in turn reduce timber harvests and the tax revenues that flow to the counties and places like the Jewell School District, which brought the lawsuit. John DiLorenzo is representing the district.
The long and the short of it is they're going to lose about 35% of their revenues that are going to have to be made up somehow.
And while the Habitat Conservation Plan, or HCP as it's known, certainly motivated the lawsuit, that's not really the crux of it.
There happens to be a law, it's an Oregon administrative rule, that requires that the department must at least break even on its share of the revenues. It's not doing that.
In 2010, the Department of Forestry adopted the Northwest Oregon Forest Management Plan. And it does stipulate the department be able to cover its operational costs with the timber revenue it creates. In a letter to State Forester Cal Mukamoto, DiLorenzo noted that the department had operational losses of more than $13 million in 2022 and 2023.
We are asking for a court to rule that the department has two choices. Choice number one is increase the harvest revenues so Jewell can continue to offer the quality education it offers, or two, share in the sacrifice that it is expecting of all these local governments and sharply reduce its own staff.
Of course, not everyone agrees with that logic.
It's just not as cut and dry as I believe the school district and Mr. DiLorenzo are attempting to lay it out to be.
That's Grace Brayler, Wildlands Director for Cascadia Wildlands.
Oregon law requires that the state forester manage state forests to secure a wide range of values, not solely just timber harvest.
When you look at the forest plan, it does indeed say the department has to cover its costs. But it also says the department must, quote, conserve forest lands by maintaining state forest land base, and that it is required to, quote, grow and harvest trees to produce timber, revenue, jobs, and habitat for native species. Brayler argued the timber revenue is just one of many things the department must consider when deciding how to manage our forests.
There are a lot of jobs, a lot of values that come out of our state forests. Thinking of the fishing industry that has been heavily impacted by poor water quality, drought, and these environmental impacts that are exacerbated by climate change and the biodiversity loss crisis that we're facing.
But that also doesn't change the fact that timber revenues to places like the Jewell School District, they're likely to take a hit in the coming years. Governor Kotek has promised to allocate state money to offset those losses in the next legislative session. But DeLorenzo, he said there's only so much that money would fix.
It's one thing to have revenue to pay our teachers, but we need to have students to educate too. And we're not going to have students if all the parents have to move away because there are no jobs.
Still, Brayler said the state needs to take a hard look at the way these kinds of school districts are funded.
I think this gets at a much broader conversation around how to sustainably fund those essential services that may be and for some counties more than others will be impacted by the implementation of the Habitat Conservation Plan.
But she said it should not come at the expense of the forest.
It's our strong belief that that shouldn't rely on over-extracting natural resources that are to be managed for the benefit of all Oregonians, not just certain locations or a select few.
Cale Williams, KGW News.
On Monday, Washington Governor Jay Inslee signed a bill into law that has the colorful name of the Stripper Bill of Rights. We featured several segments here on the story, hearing from those workers on why change was needed in their industry. The new law requires employee training to prevent sexual harassment, identify and report human trafficking, de-escalate conflict, and provide first aid. It mandates security workers on site, keypad codes on dressing rooms, and panic buttons in places where entertainers may be alone with customers. And it limits the fees the club owners can charge strippers, since many are independent contractors who have to actually pay the club to work there before they receive money from the customers. Those were kind of the big changes that the workers had told us that they wanted. The other major change included in this law is that it opens the door for clubs to sell alcohol. Before this week, Washington was the only state in the country that did not allow booze sales in their strip clubs. The new law ties the liquor license component to compliance with the new safety regulations. But don't expect to drink if you head to a club this week. A spokesperson with the Washington's Liquor and Cannabis Board told us it could take over a year to get the liquor license process in place for the clubs. So how about that? That's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching, and remember the story, our collective story, that never ends. The good stuff's coming your way next, and you don't want to miss our show tomorrow. Evan Watson brings us an update on some elk controversy out in Gearhart. Hunters and elk lovers alike are going to want to see this one. That's right here tomorrow night at 6:30.